Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. Today we're going to be doing a video on what I think are pretty much the best and worst teams of the Series 12 metagame. And partially what's going into this is looking at the restricted pairs. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because basically this is pretty much giving a summary of the metagame as a whole. And kind of giving my thoughts on it so you guys can kind of look at it. We're going to be looking through the teams and their performances and yeah, kind of talking from there. So first off, we're going to start obviously Kyogre and Zacian. I mean, it has a 53% win rate, which considering how saturated it is actually really good. Like anything above a 50% win rate is usually pretty solid. If we look at the best placements it's had so far, it has a win in the Nino Pokeballs Limitless First Tour. Jesus was able to get third with it in the Limitless VGC kickoff event. In the Penguin Fundraiser Cup, it managed to get third. In another free for all, I guess, tournament, it was able to get one. And you'll see that honestly most of the placements are pretty consistently high, to be quite honest. Like, again, these are the best placements, but like still, you know, like very solid as a whole, right? We can also take a look at some of the matchups, right? So typically, like Zacian Kyogre, obviously, is just really strong archetype that is able to exert a lot of pressure when you use it properly. The combination of Water Spout plus Behemoth Blade is just super strong. It's able to just do a lot in that regard. And yeah, it's just a super cool option as a whole, you know? If we look up its matchups, you can see that it has a 50% win rate into itself, which is kind of expected, right? I mean, you're literally always going to be playing yourself. It's literally 50-50. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. If for Yveltal Zacian, right, what's really interesting about this matchup is it has won majority of the times, with the Yveltal Zacian teams losing majority of the times. But if you look at the upper, like, echelon, or, like, the top of the kind of Yveltal and Zacian players, majority of the time they are the ones beating the Kyogre and Zacian teams. It's very interesting to see that kind of contrast. The next follow-up team that it ends up beating a lot of the time is actually a Groudon and Zacian. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because you can kind of see how that really it just has a good matchup into this stuff. I mean, you really just have like a pretty solid matchup, right? You're just able to beat that consistently. I'm not too surprised. Even Palkia and Zacian has a really good win rate into, so that's kind of cool too. The one thing worth noting that I think is super interesting is its matchup into Calyrex Shadow Rider is actually really bad. Like, or like the win rate against it is really bad. And it's like a very notable weakness because this, like, Calyrex Shadow and Zacian have been popping up a ton, and like two restricteds are being used a lot in tandem. So it's really interesting to see that, you know, it has a strong, significant, like, loss rate to these teams, you know? And it's not like these teams are just, like, once in a while. Like, they're strong, you know? But we're going to get more into that in a bit and kind of talk about that. But, yeah, no, it's just a very interesting trend to notice. As we continue down, obviously, there are some other matchups. It matches up really well in the Ice Rider, Calyrex, Kyogre. Kyurem White, it's kind of even. And then as you continue down, the matchups are a little less important. But, yeah. That's like the main thing to note there. So that's pretty much it for Kyogre and Zacian. Yveltal Zacian is really interesting to notice. So it's some really, really good placements and then just some like kind of average ones. What I will say is that it has, for the most part, placed like pretty high majority of the time, right? Like if we look here, I mean, it's placed 1 out of 183. Obviously, that was me winning. There was a 4th place team with it. Won another smaller tournament. Jude ended up winning with Yveltal Zacian. It's not marked on this specific stats, but it did end up winning the tournament that I hosted on another platform. You know, Jude ended up doing really well in the Limitless event as well. You know, you have Ally doing really well with it in the Penguin Fundraiser Cup. And then as you continue, you know, you just kind of see like it's really solid placements, consistently getting in the top 8, which is super cool. Just very good team, you know. I'm not surprised to see it do as well as it is. So it's definitely an archetype that I would expect to like continue to see succeed. It's pretty strong all around. If you look, it kind of has a lower loss win rate into this team, but I genuinely think that's just impacted by like the players who aren't doing as well, kind of impacting that matchup. Because I feel like it's very balanced for the most part. Having a 50% matchup into itself, it makes sense. Palkia and Zacian being a bit losing too. I definitely think the Gastrodon version struggles a bit more in the Palkia. Mostly because Palkia could still threaten a ton of damage, so I'm not mostly surprised to see that. if you look, one thing that's interesting about this team is actually has a worse win rate into some of the more common archetypes. But the thing is that typically the ones playing those common archetypes are the ones that are losing more with the team, so that kind of impacts the stats, right? Interesting enough too, it also has a high loss rate to Ho-Oh and White Kyurem, but that's from one tournament, so that doesn't really impact too much, I'd say. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also too, like, if you notice, like, the saturated matchups are the ones that are more worth noting. Like, it definitely has a more common loss rate, but I definitely think it's just because the Yveltal Zacian is the kind of team that really favors a player who knows what they're doing. If the player, like, isn't as good at knowing what they're doing, it definitely, like, is more difficult for them. And then as we continue down, let's see. Let's look Palkia Zacian. Okay, so Palkia Zacian, the highest placement it's had so far is 6th place in a 100-person tournament. Also got 4th place in 29-person tournament, and then you continue down. Not too many great placements. Now, that being said, it did win the first biggest event, the Victory Road event, so it is still a really good archetype. I think this archetype in general has a lot of good potential. You'll see its win rate versus Zacian Kyogre is pretty low. I'm pretty sure this is just mostly impacted by the players with this team that aren't doing as well. You could argue that for most, but like I feel like Palkia should theoretically have a really good matchup into those two. If you look at the Yveltal Zacian, it's pretty much a higher win percentage, being able to beat like majority of the Yveltal Zacian teams. It's very solid, right? Because like you can kind of pressure those Gastrodon versions, as I mentioned, really solid. 50% win rate into itself makes sense. Shadow Rider Calyrex Zacian, you'll notice it actually has a really bad win percent rate again. So from what I can see, Calyrex, Shadow, and Zacian is really going to be the new team to beat. It seems to be very solid and something that's very consistent. So very interested to kind of see how that pans out. I definitely think out of all of the archetypes, the one that we can see being the major threat is actually going to be Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and Zacian, right? We go down here. I'm pretty much only going to go down to this part because I feel like once you get beyond here, and maybe like touch on like these two, but like for the most part, like once you get beyond that, there's not like too much worth talking about. But Kyogre and Solgaleo is an interesting one, right? Its best placements have pretty much been like within the top 8, otherwise not so great. You know, if you look at a lot of these, they haven't really done so great. Kyogre Solgaleo is an interesting one. You know, I feel like it has the potential to maybe win an event, but it also has like some really exploitable weaknesses, which you can kind of notice through a lot of these performances. I think Solgaleo and Kyogre, despite like the high usage, doesn't necessarily justify it. And you can kind of see that through its performance, right? Like its win percent versus Kyogre Zacian, very low. Win percentage versus Yveltal Zacian, very low. Win percentage versus Groudon Zacian, very low. Or like below average, right? So kind of rough, you know? Like there's a lot of things it like doesn't really match up that great into, and the teams that it's beating majority of the time aren't really that relevant, you know? So take that as you will. This archetype definitely needs a little bit of work in it. But that being said, I mean, it could potentially do something, I guess, if it's built the right way. Next up, Groudon Zacian. So this archetype is interesting. At first, I was praising it a lot. I was like, you know, this team could be really good. Like, I think it's solid. The more I've seen of this archetype, the less I like it. It might just need another build, but like if you look at his win percentage versus Kyogre Zacian, first off, that's annoying. Second off, Calyrex, Shadow, and Zacian, I feel like eat this archetype alive, especially if it's built properly. It is so annoying to deal with. Like, it is so strong. It's just crazy to me, like, how good it is. I really feel like that the two most common archetypes, like, really give this thing a run for its money. It even has a high loss rate to, like, Kyogre Solgaleo, which is kind of sad, right? Like, because it's kind of weak versus other stuff. Also, like... Oh, no, sorry. It actually is a good win rate versus these, I should say. But it has a really bad win rate versus Ice Rider Calyrex and, like... you know, Kyogre, and like I could definitely see that. So I could see where it has troubles there. The nice thing is it does be Palkia Zacian, but it's kind of struggling versus like one of the bigger archetypes, which is Kyogre Zacian. It's a little bit rough in that regard. You know, some of the best placing teams, you know, like typically they have the standard like Venusaur, Charizard, Groudon, Zacian, Ensign, like filler. You know, go here. You know, Zacian, Gigantamax, Venusaur, Charizard. Groudon, 2 difference, you know, and like you can kind of see like how that plays out. I'm actually gonna go back and look at the top performers for each one just to kind of show you guys. So for like the team that won, you know, it's a Kyogre Zacian team, you know, it has the Among Us version. If you go over here, this version over here with Jesus has a Venusaur version with the same like kind of build. Continue down here. This was the only different version of the team that we saw, right? Kind of just gives you an idea of like what's strong and like what's not. All right, so continuing down, we're gonna go to Ice Rider, Calyrex, Kyogre. This archetype's really weird, honestly. I mean, it's done like decent. You know, Penguin Fundraiser Cup, I got second place with a Choice Scarf Ogre variant of this team, which I've seen a bunch, and a super offensive Regieleki, which kind of makes sense, right? So you can do some certain stuff with it that makes it decent, and it does have some good second place finishes. But if you look besides that, pretty bad placements. I mean, one of its best placements was 145th of like 183, right? And like that's not super great. Like, and that's not even just like this, not even just Pangy. Like, it's just others. Like, you'll see like if these are some of the best performances, like it's definitely really bad, right? Like, Calyrex Ice Rider Kyogre is just like not the best in my opinion. I think it'll definitely be overshadowed by Calyrex Shadow. In terms of the archetypes it matches up well into, you'll see it has a really high loss rate to Kyogre and Zacian, which is not so great. It's Yveltal and Zacian, it does have a higher win rate, but I think that this is mostly just due to inexperience from certain players with the matchup. I feel like if you have the right tech moves and the right matchup, you're able to beat this team consistently. Groudon and Zacian, it has a high win percentage into as well, which is nice. Obviously, even into itself. Problem is, it starts having really bad matchups since like Palkia and Zacian, Kyogre and Solgaleo. It does have a really good matchup, though, into Shadow Rider, Calyrex, Zacian, which is really interesting, or at least has had good performances versus it. Obviously, there's very limited data to work with, so, you know, that kind of skews a little bit. If we look at the highest placing, I mean, you know, they kind of just fill in that standard niche. I think that's the one problem with these teams. Finally, Shadow Rider, Calyrex, and Zacian. This archetype is very strong. Also, in the tournament that I hosted, it placed super, super well. But we will take a look at like the archetype in general. You'll see it has 1 out of 100, 2nd out of 183. Person I played versus 7 out of 183, 1st out of 125. Like these are just decent placements considering like it's an archetype that's been being used more recently. You'll see the first build by Tabu just has the Gastro Instant Rillaboom core with Thundurus, and then Zacian Shadow Rider Calyrex, pretty basic version. So this one biases more into the offense with offensive Whimsicott, and I've been seeing teams with like both of these either going with a more offensive mode of the, you know, Shadow Rider Zacian Whimsicott, or going with a more defensive mode. Typically that's the variations you're going to see majority of the time with these teams, right? But yeah, overall I find it very interesting as a whole. You know, there's a lot that can be done with it that's kind of cool. If you look at its matchups, it has a really high win percentage into Zacian and Kyogre, which is super nice. Really high percentage win into Palkia and Zacian. These are two very, very dominant cores. Now, it does have a bad win rate into Yveltal and Zacian, but I think genuinely if the matchups are improved a little bit with the the teams, it could definitely be good. I mean, it literally has a good win rate into everything except for that. And then Ice Rider, Calyrex, Ogre is like pretty atrocious for it, but that team's not even common enough to typically like matter, you know? So that's the main thing there. I just found kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm not surprised Yveltal gives this team the most trouble. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting team. One last team I want to talk about. Probably not going to talk too much about this version. I'm going to talk more so about this version. Shadow Rider, Calyrex, Groudon. Super solid team. Did really well on Victory Road. Managed to get top 8 in like a huge or top 4 in a huge tournament. Super strong team, right? And you see like it got 9th place. This version was using a more offensive version with Charizard. You know, there are other defensive versions that leverage the Gastro Instant mode more. It's just really solid, right? These are just solid performances, and like this archetype is just like a very cool team as a whole, you know? But yeah, that's pretty much it. The main thing I just wanted to highlight, you know, just kind of looking at these teams and kind of seeing like, you know, what's popular, what's not. Yeah, and we'll also have a video as well talking about what I think are the top 5 restrictions in the format, kind of talking about that. We'll probably use a bit of this data to back it up, but hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Thank you guys so much for all the support, as always, and I will see you guys on the next video. Make sure to check out the Patreon, and make sure to check out coaching if you guys would like to support the channel beyond these videos, and make sure to leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see next. All right, guys? Thank you so much for all the support. Appreciate it. See you guys in the next video. Peace.